Lunch and Learn. This is special for many reasons, one of which October is American Archives Month, although we try year-round to celebrate the fact that archives are important, the records here are important, and they are the records of the people. But that's really the message to get out, particularly in October, that these records are for all of us, and it is our duty to preserve them and make them accessible to you. So the Lunch and Learn program, as you know, if you've been here before, we really try to highlight the interesting and important things that we can all learn about our heritage from the records. And today we have a really fantastic, fun, exciting presentation that I'm so much looking forward to myself. So I'm not going to hold you back any longer from it. I just want to say that our next Lunch and Learn for November is next week, so there's very little time to prepare. November the 6th, we are having former staff member Michelle Fitzgerald present about nature and Homewood, the historic home in Baltimore, and how they have incorporated nature into their interpretation, the grounds, the decorative arts there. So I'm going to leave some of these flyers here. There are also some at the front desk. We hope you will consider joining us for that really fantastic presentation. But today, we have one of our own dear, although not dearly departed staff members, Rachel Frazier, who is not just the queen of the night, as you will find out, she is also the queen of the search room. So if you come and use our records here, you probably on a daily basis see her working very hard to make those records accessible to you, to make sure that we have a very kind, professional, expedient, courteous staff that helps you find what you need. And she had a specific interest in telling us some weird and wild and spooky stories, things that she's come across in helping people find records and looking at the records themselves. So I was so excited that she was willing to do a Halloween presentation. Rachel has she has a wonderful job here, but also she has a very strong educational background to do this sort of work. She is a graduate of the University of Maryland with a degree in English and a minor in history, and that started her love of history. But now, since she's really found her passion for archives and public service, she is going back and getting her master's degree in library science with a concentration in archives. And I will tell you that she shares such important information from us old fogies who graduated long ago, new information that she's learning, and so I feel like I get to benefit from her education as well. So I'm thrilled today that she is taking off her search room hat and putting on her veil to present to you spooky stories from the stacks of the Maryland State Archives. Hold on tight! Let's let everyone get settled before we hold on tight. A little longer.
Well, thank you so much, Emily. And I need my mood lighting to work. There we go. And to see my notes. Well, thank you, Emily, for that great introduction, and thank you, Christine, for videotaping this. Hope we don't get any like specters in the back when we actually review the videotape. And thank you all for joining us to get into the Halloween spirit by exploring the stranger side of Maryland's history. We'll explore records that range from the beautiful and mysterious to the strange and otherworldly, to the deeply terrifying, all through the Maryland State Archives' own wonderful collections. Now, as Emily actually mentioned, as a reference archivist, I get to help people all throughout the day to look for unique collections for either, it could be a common question, it could be an unusual question, and it finally dawned on me, I should be keeping notes on the unusual things that we come across. And a lot of them are things that we just stumble across while looking for something totally unrelated. So through these notes and the help of my wonderful colleagues, here are some of my favorites. Now, what inspired this presentation was coming across a very ordinary looking photograph in our collections with an unusual title. So this undated photo depicts an area of Western Maryland, and it has the photographer's own caption, which, as you see, is the shades of death on the old National Pike, 6 miles east of Grantsville, Maryland. Now, something that a lot of archivists deal with is, like, if we get government records in, we usually know the background to them. But when we have private collections donated to us, like private, like photographs, diaries, things like that, we don't always get the backstory to it. So finding this prompted me to say, well, what is the story behind this photograph? And this whole presentation is the result of this. So we are going to go back to what I found out about this photograph. But what is it about mysterious old glimpses into the past that feels like it fits Halloween so well? The reason lies in the influence on the modern day of the ancient Celtic holiday of Samhain. It's spelled Samhain, but it's Samhain. Thanks to Maria Day for actually correcting my pronunciations. I didn't completely embarrass myself. And it influences our Halloween traditions more often than we realize. Understanding the history of Samhain helps us understand how we celebrate Halloween now, how it was celebrated in Victorian times. It's really fascinating. So Samhain was a way of celebrating the harvest. The ancient Celts were leaving summer behind. They were looking ahead to the unknown future. They also were honoring the spiritual forces and the souls of the deceased who were believed to wander the earth during this time when the veil separating the living and the dead, between the mortal and the supernatural, they believed that veil was thinner. With the advent of Christianity, Christianity did not completely eradicate ancient Celtic beliefs. It simply adopted them and modified them. And ancient Celtic beliefs were so strong you could not have eradicated them. So even now, when we call Samhain Hallows Eve, or Hallows Evening, or basically Halloween now, even though it's the eve before All Saints' Day, when we celebrate the saints, if you're a Christian, all of this still has adopted Samhain, the ancient pagan Celtic beliefs. So keeping that in mind, the traditions of believing in magic and an interest in the mysterious future survived through the centuries, especially brought to America by Irish immigrants. And it even shows up in our collections in the Centreville Times in 1902. I'm going to read a little excerpt from this wonderful article I found in our collections. Last Friday night, according to the calendar, the annual revels of gnomes, sprites, witches, and fairies was held, for that was October 31st, and therefore the eve of All Hallows, or as it is more commonly called, Halloween. How the little men in green amuse themselves, no one in these days of skepticism is permitted to know, and so their imitators above ground must work out charms for themselves. Halloween is the night upon which men and maids find out what fate has in store for them in the shape of a life partner. And the article goes on to describe Halloween party games, because there's still that aspect of like divination and looking to the future. So the first party game they describe is one they say is a little bit dangerous and not for timid girls. They throw a little sexism in there as well. And they say what you do is you get a mirror and you get a candle, and it has to be on Halloween. You walk down the stairs backwards. Walk down the stairs backwards. When you get to the bottom of the staircase, you look in your mirror with the candle, and the face that you see is your future spouse. So there's that. The other Halloween game they mentioned is you get an apple and you peel it, but you have to keep the peel intact as you spiral through it, and you cannot break the peel. And it says if you do an intelligent peeling, you then throw the apple peel in one piece over your shoulder, and it's supposed to fall on the floor, making the initials of the first letter of the last name of your future spouse. If you break the peel, you will be single forever. So anyway, some lighthearted Halloween games. I've never been able to peel an apple in one piece. It was like so much anyway. So, exactly. Now we know why they developed those apple peelers. The real reason. Now I was hoping to find, oh, actually I don't want to miss this part. So the article ends by the complaining. And I love this because this is 1902. They complain, Halloween celebrations have greatly degenerated in recent years, as about the only celebration now indulged in, especially in the country towns, is by a crowd of young folk who masquerade and see how much mischief they can get into. Yay, good for young people. So when I read that, I was really hoping to find a picture of people masquerading for Halloween, dressed up, or a Halloween ball, or something like that. And I found this. It's really spooky. Everyone looks slightly terrified. It fits in the haunted mansion. I was actually a little heartbroken to find out it's not for Halloween. So it is large quotation marks in your mind, historically accurate colonial clothing for Colonial Day in downtown Annapolis in May 1928. What I also love is if you think about like late 19th century, turn of the century styles, his stovepipe hat is probably his own or from his dad or something. It's wonderful. It's terrifying and it's just so awesome. But speaking of Annapolis, actually, before I move on to my next Annapolis record, if you think about, even though this is not for Halloween, they're still showing a love for connecting to the past, even honoring ancestors, which still fits into that heritage of Solomon. But speaking of Annapolis, one of my favorite finds for this presentation comes from Annapolis as well. The Moss collection of Sam's family papers in our special collections. It's a donation. It holds books, diaries, letters, correspondence, and it includes a gorgeous mourning card. And it's mourning as in M-O-U-R-N-I, I can't spell on Authentic. Not enough caffeine, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. It is so beautiful. It's as a work of art, it's gorgeous. I love how it's very Victorian, it's elaborate, kind of Gothic. It was very appropriate back then to give something like that to someone who's grieving. Nowadays, it really wouldn't be appropriate because it's fairly dark. But it is just one of my favorite collection items and just stunning. And it's something to think about that the Victorian era was not limited to just England as far as its influence. It had heavy influences in America. Art, literature, attitudes towards death and mourning, nostalgia. Some of the scholarly articles I found, and I'll have a bibliography at the end if anyone's interested in looking at these citations. But some of the scholarly articles I found pointed out that while the Victorian experience in England focused a lot on a fascination with death, fascination with mourning, that does translate to America, but there is still a trend in America to also look at thinking about your loved one in heaven, looking at some more positive things, and that is reflected even in the poem here as an American Victorian mourning card. Fair vision, thou hast won my heart, O in return give thine to me, smile and we will never part, for thou art my star of destiny. And it's just beautiful. And sad too. But as for the influence of the Victorian era in America, there are few more perfect examples than one of the most famous authors of creepy, scary literature. And literature I might have been obsessed with in my 20s, maybe still am, but it's Edgar Allan Poe. He, even though he was born, I believe, in New York, I think, he died in Baltimore in 1849. Now, our non-circulating library holds many beautiful out-of-print books, including this 1885 publication from the Land Office of Maryland. And it has, within this publication, it has various articles on Maryland history, including a defense of Edgar Allan Poe, life, character, and dying declarations of the poet. But his attending physician felt a need to he felt like he got like Poe got a bad rap and really wanted to say what a great person he was. So it has amazing illustrations. It has Poe looking healthier than he ever looked. I also love the shadow from when it was printed on the right. It's very ghostly. It has a street scene in Baltimore from 1849. Now it does say a street scene in the city where Poe died, so I don't think it's of the specific street, but they're trying to put that little spin on it. And it actually has a print of the hospital where he passed away. What I didn't notice until just a few days ago, this was for my presentation for months, but a few days ago I noticed they put a star to show the window of the room where he had actually passed away. And you can even see the Baltimore's Washington Monument and the little carriage and horses. It's just really a charming print and extremely morbid at the same time. Now, so my favorite, they're all favorite illustrations for me. My favorite illustration from this publication is an illustration of a section of his most famous poem, The Raven. And his poetry focused often on mourning the loss of a loved one. Like in the poem, he's mourning Lenore. And this is a perfect segue into this piece of mourning jewelry that we received in our special collections in the Brooks and Omenhauser collection. This is jet jewelry. And the Encyclopedia Britannica describes jet as a dense, fine-grained, compact variety of coal. And it can be easily carved and shined as jewelry. It's a type of coal. It's not the kind that you would use to barbecue with. It's just it's a variation. But I had no idea that it was a type of coal until researching that. And the engraving is just beautiful. As Mary Louise Keat, from the University of Vermont, wrote in her article, Sentimental Collaborations, Mourning and Middle-Class Identity in 19th Century America, poems, gravestones, hair remembrances, can also include jewelry, not only work to preserve the memory of lost loved ones, but also work to create a world that would deny that loss, and such artifacts work to prevent the alienation that the separation of death might otherwise entail. And for jet jewelry, manufacturing actually skyrocketed from the 1840s to the 1870s, all due to the Victorian fascination with death and mourning. Now the collection also includes these beautiful, tiny hymn and prayer books. And also includes a rather ghostly image. Now, it looks ghostly to the modern eye at least, but is it really ghostly? What this actually is a daguerreotype, which is an image printed on glass, but it lost the dark backing that actually makes it look like a photograph. And I've never seen a daguerreotype without the dark backing before, and it's just such a haunting image. And you can even see the little bit of coloring on the photograph, so it's beautiful. And many historical practices relating to death and mourning, they can feel quite morbid today, and a great example is the winged death's head. How many people have heard of that symbol? Well, we sit in the same office, don't we? Yes, I've never ever heard of it before. Now, the last trip I made to Colonial Williamsburg, I saw a jeweler who had this beautiful little ring, and it had a skull with some little angel wings, but it was very stylized. You had to look really close to see the design, and because she was an historian and a jeweler, it was made for her when her father passed away. So, and he had always called her his angel. So I was like, that's still a little morbid, but it's very sweet. So here is a non-stylized version that is from Maryland. So, according to the University of Massachusetts Amherst Libraries, it's one of the oldest designs that New England stone carvers used on tombstones. And it dates back to the mid-1600s, and it just spread in popularity to other areas. Now, this image is something I came across in one of our non-circulating library books. It's a 1961 book called, and I'm not making up the title, Ghost Towns of Talbot County. It's actually a book that's meant to honor the towns that have basically disappeared, fallen apart, fallen below the ground, just really have, no longer exist, sadly. This is from the Maryland town of Dover. It's not the same as Dover, Delaware, and it no longer exists. The tombstone, according to the author, dates back to 1740 for 14-year-old Daniel, who is the son of Elizabeth Harrison. And the fact is, for a child, shows this is not meant to be disturbing or scary. For their time frame, it still was an act of love to put something like that on a tombstone. It's meant to remind people, it's meant to remind people of the temporary nature of life, which I think that works. What I can't get past are the bat wings. But when I did more research through the university's scholarly articles, the wings are supposed to symbolize taking you to the afterlife, to carry you to the afterlife, but they're bat wings. I just Now, I will say, if you look up winged death's head online, you'll find even more disturbing, far more disturbing than this, and far darker, and a little bit awesome, but just don't look at it too late at night. Now, with Halloween tradition centering on a fascination with the mysterious, as well as with death, it's not surprising that a fascination with strange and horrible ways to die has become part of the modern Halloween traditions. You knew it was coming. Or if you didn't, I'm sorry. Helping researchers search for death certificates is part of my job, so it was only a matter of time that I would stumble across this. You're so compassionate. So this is a 1909 death certificate in our collections. He's only 24, and the jury verdict is he had died of accidental poisoning. His name was Charles L. Pippin, and he passed away on January 10th in 1909 in Caroline County. So if you're wondering about the story behind this, a lot of times when we're doing, as many of you know, when we're doing historical research, we have to look at a lot of different places to start to build a story. And newspapers actually gave me an answer of what happened to him. He is described as the popular young undertaker who drank poison in stage wine while acting in an amateur play on the night of January 1st. There are so many things happening at so many levels with this reality. So the Denton Journal called this the Marydell tragedy because of where it occurred, and the reporter actually reflected the fear that was kind of going around the neighborhood at the time, that someone had this is a quote-unquote, crept in to the theater to, quote, fix the fatal dose. Sadly, the investigation found that Mrs. Maud Pippin, who said she was not related to Charles, had thrown a bottle with traces of poison into her well following Charles Pippin's death. Now, Mrs. Pippin, this is a quote from the article, Mrs. Pippin admitted to the detective that she threw the bottle into the well after the death of young Pippin. It sounds like something out of Charles Dickens. But declares that she did not put corrosive supplement in the raspberry vinegar that she furnished for the stage wine. She said she used the poison for cleaning beds. Now, I was just as confused when I read that, because, and what also was confusing to me is the reporter, the reporter doesn't really act like that's a strange statement. So when you read the article, they don't go on and say, she said it was for cleaning beds. What? Why would she even make up such a flimsy excuse? Who cleans beds with poison? So I did some research, and it was actually not weird. So, through some research, I got help from a book of household tips by Mary Butler Varnum of Washington, D.C., who is joining us this evening. She's not amused by my sense of humor.
She's secretly judging.
Or she just doesn't like the fact that I'm wearing her outfit better than she is. No, I actually didn't realize that until yesterday. I was like, are we dressed the same? So she wrote Recipes and Remedies for Antebellum Washington, the Varnum Hill Family Household Book, in which she recommends where was I? Okay. That didn't happen. Anyway, she recommends a mixture of egg whites. Whew, okay. She recommends a mixture of egg whites and mercury for killing bed bugs. Yeah, it's for killing bed bugs. So it was actually not unusual that the lady was using poison to clean beds. Now, the investigation by Detective Poehler of Baltimore showed that the victim's teeth, and this comes out later in later articles than the ones we just saw, it starts to come out that the victim's teeth were loosened and his tongue badly burned, which the detective believes shows conclusively that Pippin did drink bichloride of mercury. So if she was actually using the poison to get rid of bed bugs and mixed up bottles on accident, it definitely could be an accident. It could be an accident. Look at the definite. And she is not related to him. So this is not going to be the first time we'll talk about ill-fated teeth, but let's move on. But we'll go back to this. So mysterious deaths abound when you search the records of any state. But one may not expect our own government house, also known as the governor's mansion, as a place where a strange death occurred. If you're from Annapolis, you might have heard some local lore that the location was the site of a strange accidental death in 1876. Now, this is the only time in my presentation where I'm going to be talking about local lore, because everything is factual based, but it's such a strong legend that I want to bring it up, but you can make your own conclusion. So in the present day, the governor's mansion has the architecture of a Georgian-style country house. So it's simple, it's symmetrical, very beautiful aesthetic. But when it was built in 1870, it was on trend in its style as a Victorian mansion. According to our own Commission on Artistic Properties, visitors to the house entered through magnificent walnut doors, carved with the Maryland coat of arms and symbols of Maryland's industry and agriculture. The back of the mansion does not disappoint either. Now, this photograph is from the 1920s, and it looks like if you're there around the same time, you can indulge your sweet tooth and your nicotine habit. If you run into our friend from the AA Candy and Tobacco Company of Camp Parole. It's kind of my favorite part about the photograph, actually. So this is close to how Government House would have looked when Reverdy Johnson, a respected local politician and lawyer, died suddenly there in 1876. There are no death certificates for Maryland's counties, including Anne Arundel County, prior to 1898. We kind of have to rely on newspapers, church records, probate records like wills to just piece together someone's death. So I did look at newspapers, and according to the Maryland Republican, in February 1876, the sad and sudden death of the Honorable Reverdy Johnson at the governor's mansion in this city on Thursday evening last tells upon the ears of this community like a clap of thunder or an earthquake. He had visited the city the day before for the purpose of arguing a case before the Court of Appeals, and was at the time of his death the guest of Governor Carroll, where just a few moments before he had gone to dine. Now, Governor Carroll, and I feel very bad for Governor Carroll, he found Johnson lying in the yard in a pool of blood. This is a quote to a person, below a projecting bay window. Now, the newspapers went out of their way to suggest he had walked downstairs around the yard for an after-dinner stroll, and that, quote, there were loose pieces of coal lying on the ground, and the supposition is that he trod upon one of these. His head probably struck the edge of the projecting base of wall, resulting in a shattered skull. However, the newspapers also point out that he was very independent, intelligent, but was suffering from poor eyesight. So the local lore is that he accidentally fell out of the second-story bay window. But you can decide, was it fall from the second floor or death by killer coal? I'm so sorry. Okay, so now that we're talking about unfortunate ways to die, remember we had talked about the shades of death? So I did find out that what historians commonly believe is the history behind this unusual name. Now, J. Spence Howard's 18th century map lists the area as having a deep pine forest, which you can tell this is a later map because there's a lot that has been cleared away. But you can see the density farther back where it hasn't been cleared yet. But has a deep pine forest through which Braddock's Point was cut, or Braddock's Road was cut, sorry. The gloomy aspect of which gave it its name of the Shades of Death. But that most likely is not the reason. According to Maryland, a new guide to the Old Line State by Earl Arnett, Robert J. Bruger, and our very own retired state archivist, Dr. Edward C. Pappenfuse, alternate Route 40 takes one over and across Little Savage Mountain on a route wagoners called the Shades of Death. And if you see number 9 circled, this map actually puts 9 as the Shades of Death. They actually put it on the map. Here, and I'm still quoting from the new guide to the Old Line State, here tall pine trees loomed over the national road and provided cover for highwaymen who robbed and murdered travelers who were going from Baltimore towards the Ohio River, and we can find supporting newspaper articles from that time frame that actually back this up. In 1930, an article in the Baltimore Sun also recounted that the grade and the curves made it impossible for the stage driver to see any barrier thrown across the road until he was upon it. The dense forest on the upper side of the road made it possible for the robbers to fell a tree across the road with little trouble, and then, after the robbery, the same forest offered an almost impenetrable retreat until pursuit died down. Now, even when something makes it into the newspaper, we still have to assume that sometimes it could just be oral tradition. But it's a very interesting theory, that's the reason for the name. Now, if you find the Shades of Death slightly unnerving, then brace yourself. I'm sorry, that was terrible suspense. I really just needed water. So, if you look at Talbot County death certificates from 1909, a lot of things are happening in 1909. These include, these two for, here's the first, Edith Woodill, who tragically died from a fractured skull at age 22, and for Robert Eastman a few days later. Now, on the death certificate, they say they don't know his occupation or his parents' names, but it does say that he died by suicide. Now, sometimes primary sources are just a snapshot of knowledge for that time or for the person filling it out. And we did have to use I used newspapers to basically piece together what else was going on. And I have many thanks to my fellow reference archivist, Casey Mays, for telling me about this to prompt me to research it further. So it turns out, unknown to the person filling out Eastman's death certificate, Robert Eastman was a fugitive New York stockbroker. There we go. Who had embezzled $200,000 in 1909. Now, the University of Exeter recommends using measuringworth.com. So I'm not really an expert in economy back then on what actually would be the translation, but I'm going to trust the University of Exeter. This is an approximation. $5,800,000 in today's money, approximately. He's believed to have become an acquaintance with Mrs. Edith May Thompson Woodrow when she likely discovered his secret 3 weeks into their friendship. He murdered her, tried to pin it on her friends, tried to escape in a rowboat when police were pursuing him, and then took his own life. So that leads me to this photograph in our collections from June 1909. When developing this photograph, of which I'm just showing you a part of it to start off with, the photographer wrote Eastman's Bungalow. There are no dead people in this, I will tell you right now. It's fine. There we go. Now, since these children do not have iPhones, they are entertaining themselves by posing in front of the location of Edith Woodill's murder. And they even got dressed up. So highlighting a gruesome murder in a Halloween presentation seems to be a long way from Samhain. But Halloween traditions also have adapted in the modern times without losing sight of their original roots. The fear of the unknown, coming from fear of spirits wandering the land on Halloween, now is broadened in modern times to fear of many types of the unknown. Here's a great quote from author Pamela Inglesby. The original appeal of the science fiction horror genre can probably be attributed to man's desire, and women's desire for fear and excitement in the form of the unknown, be it from outer space or a test tube. From Shelley's Frankenstein, Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Wells' War of the Worlds, and the many invaders from outer space films of the 50s, through the gruesome slasher films of today, we have enjoyed increasingly brutal visions of man's vulnerability to unpredictable savage forces. So technically, it's still within that same piece of human nature to be afraid of the unknown, spirits on Samhain, to more things that may affect more modern sensibilities. Human nature really doesn't change. It just changes as far as how we interpret Halloween. But let's actually back up, because that mention of science fiction is also interesting. The Victorian era showed a rise in the interest and fascination with death and spiritualism, but also in science, and the stranger the better. From mummy unwrapping parties, not archaeologically approved from the bottom, to bored rich people will do anything, to science fiction horror stories. The Victorians relished in odd sciences, and these have become almost synonymous with Halloween to this day. I mean, you'll see the little Frankenstein Halloween cards for kids. Now, in our own donated collections, when it comes to strange science, we have published volumes containing very strange, quote-unquote, scientific illustrations, like this one.
Oh.
So this is from the American Phrenological Journal. It's a Victorian era pseudoscience, so very fake science. It says the shape of the skull, the facial features, all of that can tell you someone's talents, type of intelligence. When you see a mad scientist in old movies, in this case, The Outer Limits, one of my favorite episodes, portrayed with a huge forehead, that is a holdover from Victorian phrenology. They even tend to still cast people who look like they have larger foreheads, like even Christopher Lloyd in Back to the Future. They kind of give him that look. People may not even realize that's a holdover from phrenology. Phrenology was so ridiculously popular that actual medical journals were published focusing on phrenology. Now, How many of you have read some of the original Sherlock Holmes stories? Yeah. I was fascinated by the stories in my 20s, and you'll also know that phrenology comes up quite a bit. So here's a strange quote I love from The Hound of the Baskervilles, from an eccentric client who was really obsessed with phrenology. And you can tell that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, although he found phrenology interesting, is making fun of it here. So I'll do my best to read it the way that I think he meant for it to be read, but I'm probably going to be very sarcastic. You interest me very much, Mr. Holmes. I had hardly expected so, let's see if I can say this right, dolichocephalic skull, having a relatively large skull, or such well-marked supraorbital development would be right above your eyes. Would you have any objection to me running my finger along your parietal fissure? A cast of your skull, sir, until the original is available. A cast of your skull, sir, until the original is available would be an ornament to any anthropological museum. It is not my intention to be fulsome, flattering, but I confess I covet your skull. But phrenology, so he's definitely making fun of phrenology here. But phrenology could also be taken to a nasty extreme. Let's take a look, as just an example, at this image from, oh, I missed our Sherlock Holmes illustrations. Oh, I'm sorry. Yay. Okay, let's not see far less flattering. So here is an image from our phrenological journals in our collection. Think about what you guess this is supposed to represent.
Me on a Friday?
So, consider it to your credit if you get it wrong. So, it is a forsaken woman. So to me, it looks more like a bad hair day for someone who's up too late studying. But it is an extremely judgy and nasty pseudoscience, because they do not show a forsaken man either. Now, when you get to the point also of not only criticizing people, but also puppies and horses, you know you've gone off the deep end. Now these journals, so these journals weren't just drawings. They actually, oh goodness. What on earth did I just do? It's haunted. Okay. Now these journals weren't just drawings. The drawings are actually, I had to flip through quite a few pages to find drawings. The majority of these journals are scholarly articles, quote unquote, including this article on vampirism.
Hey.
Now, you probably, when you think of a vampire, you probably would think of this. Bela Lugosi in 1931 Dracula. I'm going to take a little sidestep here. You probably don't think of a vampire being this. So this is an amazing piece in our collections, courtesy of the Peabody, and it's a vampire. The title is, does anyone want to guess the title? It's a vampire surprising a writer.
Okay. Okay.
Now, very little is known about the background to this. It could be an illustration for something, who knows, but my guess, and then this is just a guess on my part, is maybe it's writer's block. I mean, it's tattered clothes. I feel like maybe he's sucking the creativity out of me, just shaking his pen. I can't think of anything to write. But going back to the journal article on vampirism, the author actually discusses vampires from the Victorian psychological perspective, if that's a thing, with the article concluding that modern vampires, modern as in the 1840s to 70s, are old men who marry younger women wanting to feel young again. So to take anything away from this, phrenology is extremely mean and judgy pseudoscience. Okay, so going back to teeth, What about strange sciences that are actually real, that are not pseudosciences? For this, I'm going to show you a small box that lies quietly stored away in our basement stacks. Now, when you think of the basement of an archives, you probably will think of something like this. And I'm sure you recognize this Raiders of the Lost Ark. I am very sorry to disappoint you that our basement looks like this. And it also looks, this could be our first floor, our second floor, our third floor. Nice clean basement stacks that are temperature controlled. But I am sure that this tiny little box will not disappoint. Now, if you take off the wrapper and open the drawers, you will have a surprise. This is actually a great example of a superficially terrifying item. Superficially terrifying item that in fact reveals a wonderful part of Maryland history. Now, Dr. Samuel Callahan was the first African-American dentist to set up practice in Annapolis. This is actually a sample case for dentures as created by the Dentist Supply Company of New York, and the drawers feature cutting edge, for the time, naturalistic porcelain teeth that could be presented to patients considering dentures, and they're meant to make people feel comfortable smiling again. They're even tinted a natural color. So it's actually a really awesome piece of Annapolis history, African-American history, dentist history. But I unfortunately came across this before I knew what it was.
Oh dear.
So if you get scared this Halloween, then just hold on to that happy feeling, thinking about that nice Dr. Callahan wanting to replace your teeth. That didn't come out the way I mentioned it. So now that as we approach the end of our hour of unique, strange, macabre, chilling, slightly happy, and chilling stories, what is Halloween without a ghost story? So, few stories are as emblematic of the continuation of an ancient Celtic belief in the traveling dead than an incident researched by our own historian here at the Maryland State Archives, Owen Laurie. And many of you know Owen as being as leading the Maryland 400 project, studying the Revolutionary War. You may also encounter him occasionally on the reference desk, where he helps out about once a week, and he's extremely knowledgeable. So he told me that he had researched a court case that admitted a ghost sighting as evidence in Queen Anne's County in 1790. Now, I did have to abridge the testimony a little bit for the sake of time, but I'm taking this from the actual court case. And you'll need to keep 3 people straight in this story. There's Thomas Harris, who's dead. William Briggs, who's his lifelong childhood friend. And James Harris is the dead man's brother. So Thomas Harris, he's dead. William Briggs is one of his best friends. James Harris is the dead man's brother. But the most important figure in this story is not a human, but actually the dead man's horse. Okay, so William, here we go. William Briggs said, and this is actually a testimony, so he is under oath. William Briggs said that he was 43 years of age, that Thomas Harris died in September in the year 1790. In the March following, William Briggs was riding, not Thomas Harris. William Briggs was riding near the place where Thomas Harris was buried on a horse formerly belonging to Thomas Harris. After crossing a small branch, which is a stream, his horse began to walk on very fast. He entered a lane adjoining to the field where Thomas Harris was buried. The horse suddenly wheeled in a panel of the fence, looked over the fence into the field where Thomas Harris was buried, and neighed very loudly. The witness, William Briggs, then saw Thomas Harris coming toward him in the same apparel he had last seen him in his lifetime, and it was a sky blue coat. Just before he came to the fence, he varied to the right and vanished.
His horse immediately took the road. Thomas Harris came within 2 panels of the fence to him, but William did not see his features nor speak to him. William was acquainted with Thomas Harris when a boy, and there had always been a great intimacy between them. He thinks the horse knew Thomas Harris because of his neighing, pricking up his ears, and looking over the fence. William was with Thomas Harris when he died, but had no particular conversation with him. Sometime after, William was lying in bed about 11 and 12 o'clock at night when he heard Thomas Harris groan. It was like the groan he gave a few minutes before he expired. Mrs. Briggs, his wife, heard the groan. She got up and searched the house. He did not, because he knew the groan to be from Thomas Harris.
Could have mentioned that.
Sometime after, when in bed and a great firelight in the room, he saw a shadow on the wall, and at the same time he felt a great weight upon him. Sometime after, when in bed and asleep, he felt a stroke between his eyes, which blackened them both. The blow awaked him, and all in the room were asleep. It's certain no one in the room struck him. The blow swelled his nose. Then, in October, about twilight in the morning, William saw Thomas Harris 100 yards from his house. An hour and a half afterwards, in the same place, he again appeared, coming as before, came up to the fence, leaned on it within 10 feet of William. William then asked, "Why not go to your brother instead of me?" Thomas Harris said, "Ask me no questions." Thomas Harris told him to ask his brother James if he did not remember Thomas Harris's brother James, if he did not remember the conversation which passed between them on the east side of the wheat stacks, the day he was taken with his death sickness. Then he declared that he wished all his property to be kept together by James Harris until his children arrived at age, then the whole should be sold and divided among his children. He then told the witness, William, to turn and disappeared. The witness later asked James Harris if he were...
James Watson, please call
I was gonna say James
640. Thank you.
Asked James Harris if he okay, so then the witness, William, asked James Harris, the surviving brother, if he remembered the conversation between him and his brother at the wheat stack. He said he did, then told him what had passed, said he would fulfill his brother's will. James was satisfied that William had seen his brother, Thomas, for no other person knew the conversation. And many thanks again to Owen Laurie for this research that he conducted. And you can draw your own conclusions about what you think happened. So a quote I love from the book Maryland Legends, folklore from the Old Line State, which I feel like ties together with so much of what we talked about today, is that folklore encompasses far more than just narratives, rituals, and foodways. It highlights the human experience and all of the intricate components that fill people's lives with meaning. It reveals a great deal of how individuals and communities process and experience everyday life. Maria Day, the director of Special Collections, mentioned to me that in periods of especially rapid change, such as our current time, as well as such periods in the past, like the Victorian era and the Industrial Revolution, there has actually been an increased interest in understanding and honoring our past. That includes honoring the dead, embracing the unknown future, feeling connected to those who came before us, and not being afraid of letting ourselves just get a little scared during this time of Samhain, All Hallows Eve, and Halloween. Thank you. And be sure to take Halloween candy. If you don't have candy in the search, please enjoy it here or when you leave. And also, if you're interested in the bibliography of the primary sources and the secondary sources I used for the presentation, I have handouts here. Feel free to take them. And thank you so much.
I won't ask if anyone has any questions, but I just wanted to thank Rachel because, not only if you saw she took really cool materials from our archival collection, she did a lot of research to kind of ground that, and it's a great example of what you can do with archival records, using her knowledge that way was really a wonderful thing. And after Halloween, I'm going to take her on the road to the Ha Ha Hut open mic nights because she is like so funny. So we have a side gig apparently. Does anyone have any questions for Rachel?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, true. This light is making me look really creepy, even when I don't want to look like that. That was my intention in the presentation, but not now.
That, the sketch with the bat on the back of the rider down in the foreground, it looked like garlic cloves.
That's actually nice to take a look.
No, not at all. I was just trying not to.
That, I didn't even notice that, which kind of makes you depressed because you're supposed to be able to use garlic to keep them off, right?
That's right, it didn't work in this case.
And that's what's interesting. I actually went to the Peabody Library's website because it was on low, I think it was on low, or at least digitized by us. And they put question marks by it. So I think they made it maybe one of those things that's donated and there's not a lot of background story to it.
So
I just wonder if like during that time if there was maybe a story that it was illustrating. Because there's so many little details that our projector did.
Sorry, I didn't.
But
Yeah. Sorry.
no, I'm sorry. Nothing. But yeah, that's very interesting. It'd be really nice if there's like some very enterprising, like, maybe like a doctorate student or something who really wants to like figure out these mysterious pieces of artwork because it's one of my favorite pieces of artwork and you just don't know what's going on. Yeah, apparently garlic's out. So, any other questions? We'll pull that back up. Yeah.
I just had a comment.
Sure.
So, somewhere in the archives photographic collection,
Yeah.
there should be a photograph taken by a photographer going by the archives. And it shows a hand and an arm.
Is that the
In
one
the
that has a
stack.
snake around it?
What?
Is that the one with the hand holding the snake, or is this a different one?
No,
I
no.
always showed that one. It's a hand and an arm.
Yeah, it's a hand and an arm, and it's stuck between books in the stacks.
Oh my gosh, I need to look for that. I would love it if we, I don't know if we can.
Are you looking for the arm or are you looking for the photograph?
The arm doesn't exist anymore because I was the one who took the arm, put it in the.
Wait, so it was a photo of an arm that was stuck.
In the stacks, but it showed the books too, and I was sitting out here, and I could see, so I would wait for somebody to go in to retrieve a book. It was very entertaining.
Do you mind if I say who you are? Is that okay?
No.
Pat Melville is like a state treasure, and she worked for Maryland Archives for how many years? Do you mind?
Over 30 years.
It was, so you are a state treasure. Thank you for bringing that up because I need to live it.
Anyway, so I have a copy of the photograph. I can send it.
I would love that because I'd love to. I don't know if we can. It depends on work system, but doing this yearly would be a lot of fun. I don't know if we can, but or at least be able to update us with new ideas. So thank you. Great to add it. Any other questions or comments?
I think it's so funny we're asking for questions.
We're taking that slide off. Let's head to our vampire.
Our vampire team.
Let's pull this back. Well, we can have one. There we go.
There it is.
So I'll leave that up. But yeah, any other questions or? Yay! Yes. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions too, but I think we're.
You know, from fluffing up everything and sifting through everything, do you have a sense that there's a spookiest place in Maryland or region? Is it like the Eastern
The Shades of
Shore
Death.
or Western Maryland? This
I think-
Baltimore City or
I feel
Old
like the
Annapolis?
spookiest area depends on how strong the folklore is in many ways. And that's a really good question. I haven't because it pops up in unexpected places.
There's a new podcast called Ghost in My Room. We actually helped them with some documents a few weeks ago. They are exploring places like that. They explored, I think, Middleton's Tavern and the ghost lore surrounding that. They explored, I think what they got records from for us was the mysterious death of the head of the Maryland Zoo long ago. So they're just exploring ghost lore in Maryland, so that might be something neat to listen to. Because they're doing the whole thing where they take paranormal experts and historians and trying to piece it all together to see
That sounds like a good answer.
what's lore, what's truth, so that might be a good place to look at.
And definitely, like, the longer we have like written records or people living in an area, the more time we have to build that folklore, and that can really contribute too. So, any other questions?
Well, thank you all for
Thank you
joining
so
us.
much.
Rachel was kind enough to bring in Halloween